rising sun of our new day begun. Let us march on till victory is won. God of our weary years, God of our silent tears, thou who hast brought us thus far on the way.
I just want to say thank you, Rockridge. John Doolman is not here, but I really do appreciate us, the school and the administration staff, for allowing us to be here today. On behalf of Sigma Mu chapter of Omega Psi Phi and the Loudoun International Youth Leadership Summit, I want to say welcome and thank you. My name is Linwood Stokes. I'm the president of Operation Uplift. The reason we're here today is part of our inaugural lecture series. And what Operation Uplift is about is to bring educational opportunities like this to schools here in Loudoun County, to raise opportunities and funds to put on programs like this throughout the entire county. And this time last year, we came here to celebrate. I think it was the first time the school had put on their school flag, and I told the committee, I said, we have to come back to the school and do something. And here we are a year later, putting on this fabulous event. Well, the purpose and the reason we're here, not to talk about Operation Uplift, but to celebrate and to embrace the inspiration and inspiring speaker that we have here today, Ms. Joan Trumpauer. She has a great story, and I'm looking forward to making sure that if you have your cell phones on now, please cut them off, because you're going to want to hear this speech.
Good afternoon, I'm retired General Kip Ward, a proud lifetime member of the Omega Psi Phi Fraternity Incorporated, and this great Sigma Mu chapter out here in Loudoun County. And it's an absolute thrill, pleasure, and honor to be here as we, in conjunction with Rockridge Senior High School, have a program in celebration of this event. I was asked to speak about the occasion. Well, the occasion will be coming because you will hear a wonderful, wonderful story told by one of our pioneers, someone we are also very proud of for her accomplishments, her achievements, but as importantly, if not more so, her stance for freedom and equality. And you'll hear more about that.
Good afternoon. It is indeed an honor and pleasure to introduce to you this afternoon your speaker. I asked Soror Mulholland on the way to the sorority meeting last week if she had a resume that I could use to introduce her at this event. She replied that there was one someplace on the internet, but there were some things in it that were incorrect, and she had no idea how they got there. Well, I hope that at least most of the information that I found is correct. Joan Mulholland was born and raised in Arlington, Virginia. She still resides there. She attended Duke University. It was there in 1960 she participated in her first sit-in. This was not looked upon kindly at Duke at that time. So Joan left Duke and joined the Freedom Riders. This, as you know, was a brave thing for a young Caucasian woman to do at that period. Eventually, she was arrested and brought to the most dreaded prison in Mississippi, Parchman Penitentiary. One of the most interesting things that I learned about Joan from the author of the book, We Shall Not Be Moved, is that how she took notes and hid them of things that were happening when she was incarcerated. Perhaps she will share that story with you. After being released from jail, Joan enrolled in a historically black college university, Tougaloo College near Jackson, Mississippi, while some blacks, such as Charlene Hunter Hall, they were enrolling in white universities. It was at Tougaloo that Joan met Dr. Martin Luther King, Medgar Evers, and other giants of the civil rights movement. I believe that I was told that Joan continues to visit Medgar Evers' grave periodically at Arlington National Cemetery. It was at Tougaloo that she became the first white member of Delta Sigma Theta sorority. The first time I met Joan, she looked at my pendant and she said, "Well, hello, soror." Joan participated in more than 36 sit-ins and protests, including some in Arlington, Virginia. On the cover of the book, We Shall Not Be Moved, there is a picture of her sitting at a counter at Woolworth's where she and other students from Tougaloo, along with a white professor, are being doused with ketchup, kicked and clubbed. That picture also appears in a calendar called A History of Racial Injustice 2016. Now, I know that many people do not use hard copy calendars anymore. We all have our smartphones. But I assure you that this calendar is worth its weight. It is actually free, and if you see me, I can tell you how to get a free copy. Well, in March 2016, you will see the picture of Joan Mulholland. I asked her today if she was aware of the picture. She said no, and I shared it with her. After the Civil Rights Movement, Joan worked at Smithsonian, the United States Department of Commerce, and the Justice Department. She also taught English as a second language. Joan's story has been captured in a video directed by her son, Loki Mulholland. Video, I think it's available today, and you will see parts of it. It's titled An Ordinary Hero. In my opinion, Joan is anything but ordinary. She is a living legend. Please welcome my soror, Joan Mulholland.
The young people here, the lesson of this movie is never forget how to manipulate your parents. It's a life skill. My son, who had studied film, even back in high school, he called me one day, and I answered him on my rotary phone on the wall of the kitchen. Don't you know? You remember rotary phone? And he said he was thinking about bringing together a lot of people who were not known in the civil rights movement, not Dr. King or Rosa Parks. Bring them together. He wanted some contact information. So I took out my paper address book and started reading some names and their addresses and phone numbers, things like that. Well, he has a slightly different version of this. I think he just plain tricked me from the get-go. But it turns out that I am the connection thread throughout this story of the student civil rights movement of the early 60s. He does bring in and interviewed a lot of the contacts I gave him. But by the time I found out it was really sort of me, it was too late to do anything about it. So young folks, never forget how to manipulate your parents. We're going to watch this. It's an hour and a half movie. We're just going to start at the beginning, watch some, and stop, and I'll say a few things about it. And then we'll watch some more, and I'll be keeping my eye on the clock. Eyes on the prize, yes. It's this old-fashioned wristwatch. And we'll have some time for you to ask questions along the way. So we're going to start in my home, and about me growing up in Arlington and going down home. We all had down home back then, and I was in rural Georgia. Going down home to see Grandma every summer and getting involved with the students. when the sit-in started, and we'll take it on up through some of the local stories. Okay, let's go with it now.
My mother never told me the stories. All I ever knew were the pictures. In 2011, on the 50th anniversary of the Freedom Rides, I returned to Mississippi with my mother. It was there, and in subsequent interviews, that her entire story would begin to unfold. Her great-grandparents were Georgia slave owners, but after the war, the family was reduced to sharecropping and chicken thieving. Her mother moved to Washington, D.C. and married the only foreigner in the family, a Yankee. In 1941, my mother was born. But when her mother suddenly became ill, she was raised by a black woman for the first couple of months of her life. I tell you this because her mother didn't like black people, and her family, like most whites in the South at that time, believed that no matter how bad things might be, at least you weren't black. And that's the world my mother grew up in. Her family discussions of Leo Frank's lynch mob passing by her aunt's house weren't based on whether lynching was right or wrong, but if he was guilty or not. This was the South after all. And segregation and racism were a way of life.
In the 40s, in the German-occupied countries, if a Jew walking on the sidewalk did not get off the sidewalk when a German was coming and take his cap off, he was risking his life. So we had that same thing over here.
I always wondered why I had to go through the back door of the public library, why I could not go to the stacks to get my own books, why I had to go to the colored water fountain.
In Sears, I can remember white ladies and colored women bathrooms. You could not sit at Chris's counters. We used to go downtown and to buy candy or something. We couldn't sit at the counter.
We couldn't even go downtown and eat in a lot of the restaurants downtown in D.C.
They said we were supposedly equals. We were being treated that way. And I suddenly pissed off this white person. They had all kinds of things at their disposal to do me in, and there was nothing I could do about it.
He said, you ran that light. My dad said, no sir, I didn't run the light, it was yellow. Morris, I said to you, you ran that light. My dad didn't say anything. And he looked at us in the back seat, and I guess we looked like a nice little family. And he said, Morris, you like a good nigger. So I'm gonna let you off this time.
It was a separate and unequal society, basically buttressed by local customs and laws.
But that was just the way things were. You want to go, what do you mean that's the way things were?
I met whites all over who had questions raised. I later met blacks who, when they had questions raised, their parents had to tell them, it may be wrong, but don't you try to do anything about it. This is in God's hands. Here's how you protect yourself. Maybe you shouldn't ride the bus so much if that upsets you.
Your parents did that, but they also told you that it would come to an end. Because it was wrong. Anything that's that wrong can't last.
My mother accepted segregation as the way things were. But one summer, while visiting her family in Georgia, her life would change forever.
But one day this girl, Mary, I think her name was, that lived down the road, she and I would play together every summer, and we decided to sort of dare each other to go walk through Niggertown, which is down by the Coca-Cola bottling plant, and a road led off on the other side of the tracks that went through the black area, and everybody just sort of seemed to disappear into their houses or the back of their houses when these two little white girls were walking through. No one spoke to us, no one bothered us. They just made themselves invisible. I think that's when things really hit me as to how unequal they were and how unfair. I went to church regularly in Sunday school. And we memorized all these verses about do unto others as you would have them do unto you, and inasmuch as you've done it unto one of the least of these, my brethren, you've done it unto me, all that good King James. And the Sunday school would sing about Jesus loves the little children, all the children in the world, red and yellow, black and white. They are precious in his sight. Jesus loves the little children of the world. And I guess I've always taken things more or less literally, which sometimes has gotten me into trouble. But sometimes I think it's really worked to my advantage of seeing things clearly.
Joan was very aware that she was a Southerner, and she knew what that meant. And she loved the South. She loved being a Southerner. However, when her eyes were open to what it meant to be a Southerner in this day and age, in the 1950s, to recognize the huge divide in economic status between the two races, she began to really wonder, how am I, as an individual, going to change this? And I know it's somewhat alarming, really, to think that a 9 or a 10-year-old could begin to think that way, but that is exactly where her mind began to go. She didn't like what she saw. She realized it needed to be changed, and she realized somebody had to do it. But she went home and started questioning a lot of things that her mother took for granted, and it began to open up a divide, actually, between the mother and daughter.
In 1957, National Guard troops were used in Little Rock, Arkansas to enforce the Brown versus Board of Education ruling of '54. And my mother was shocked. This wasn't supposed to happen in America. Segregation had to end, and my mother vowed that if she ever had the opportunity to do something about it, she would do it. In 1961, she would get that opportunity, but the consequences of her decision would both haunt her and define her for the rest of her life.
My mother, being from this segregated environment in the South, was a segregationist. Not vicious or mean about it, but that was what she considered a normal and appropriate way of life. And it got to the point of when I was going to start applying to colleges, I wanted to go to a small church school. I think it was in Ohio, but it might have been Kentucky, out that way. And my mother was absolutely against it. Her first objection was that it was, it wasn't well known. It was not an important college. And the second, and probably her real objection, was that she was afraid it would be integrated and I might be in classes and even have a roommate who was colored, as the polite term was then. So she decided I should go to Duke University. And I just sort of gave up, and at least it would get me out of the house. And was accepted at Duke. And darned if the sit-ins didn't start. In February, my freshman year, and by spring, I was involved in the sit-ins.
When Joan began to not only participate in meetings where these things were discussed, but what actually went down to the Raleigh, Durham city and began to actually sit in with the black students, she was not only branded as a radical, they thought she was out of her mind. A Southern white woman doing this kind of thing, the only explanation was that she was mentally ill. And she was taken into for some oversight. They talked to her quite a bit after her first arrest. They insisted that she call her parents and let them know what was going on. And she was certainly taken to task by the Duke administrators about what she was doing.
I knew that what I was doing was in keeping with my understanding of Christianity and the foundation of the country with the Declaration of Independence. But at the same time, I knew it was against the way of life that virtually all the relatives I knew believed in, and that, you know, the sentiment, the only thing worse than a nigger is a nigger lover, would apply, that I would be out of the family. But there was the advantage that once you took the fatal step of stepping outside the bounds of acceptability, there was no stepping back, so you could only go forward. And that, I think that helped some of us white Southerners to just keep on keeping on. We had no place to go back to. But the movement became family. And black kids sometimes could not go back home either, because not that their parents disowned them, but because it was not safe. They were asked not to come back. They knew they could be killed. They knew their parents could be killed or their home burned down, or, you know, one thing and the next. So for a lot of us, there was no turning back.
So she immediately comes back to Northern Virginia and gets involved in the student movement up here, which had become very active since February. She moved into an area near Howard University and got involved with a group there called NAG, the Nonviolent Action Group. And their motto was nag, nag, nag. And they were going to nag the country into submission. And so a lot of the, even in Northern Virginia, a lot of the lunch counters were not yet integrated. So Joan began sitting in with her friends from NAG in almost like her neighborhood. And it was interesting because there was one sit-in that almost duplicated the Jackson sit-in.
The first time I recall meeting Joan was at the drug fair lunch counter over in Arlington. We were surrounded. I think she was sitting next to me. I think you may have seen the picture of Joan sitting right next to me with a little kid who, honestly, he couldn't have been more than 13 or 14 years of age. But he's in my face with his finger pointed directly in my face.
I think most of the focus was actually on the black students. But they would be telling you how God, you know, that things were not meant to be this way, that blacks were inferior, smelly, diseased. I don't know exactly what they said at this point, but this is the general line. That white people should rule. And this was not that long after World War II, so Nazi armbands and brown shirts and lunging police dogs, the whole thing was frightening.
It was kind of scary for a moment because, again, the thought of what the Nazi Party stood for, you know, was right in front of us. If he were indeed as dedicated as we were, you know, I expected to be hit.
There was quite a crowd gathered outside. Well, they emptied the store, and there was also people that had gathered outside that I guess they hadn't let in. But the police gave us safe passage through that, as I recollect, to some cars that were brought up. And I understand there was some gunfire that evening, whether it was aimed at someone or into the air or, you know, intimidating. I don't know what happened with that.
There was a mob outside, but we piled into the automobile and tore out of there. I mean, no one attacked us. And I think that's only because of the fact that there were still police there, and as long as they kept the peace, you know, we were safe.
Within a couple of weeks, the drugstores in Northern Virginia desegregated, and my mother and her companions began looking for their next target. They settled on Glen Oak Park in Maryland with its segregated swimming pools and amusement rides. My mother purchased the tickets as her fellow black students rushed to get a seat on the merry-go-round. Because, as she would later say, it's the back of a bus and the back of a line. The but there's not a backup of Garrison.
I want to say about the lunch counters in Arlington. Under state law, not only the people sitting at the lunch counter, black and white together, to be arrested, but if we were served, the person who allowed us to sit and eat together could have been arrested under the Virginia Public Assembly law. Well, I think a lot of the small chain local drugstores. For those who are younger, a drugstore was a lunch counter. This was before McDonald's. In order to quick bite to eat, you went and sat at the lunch counter at the drugstore. Now we have CVS and what's the other one? Rite Aid. Those places had these lunch counters, and they sold all manner of things cheaply. Think dollar store and McDonald's combined. Okay. So the managers of these small chains, like drug fairs, were often started by guys families had come down during the Depression in the 30s from New York City trying to get those good government jobs under Roosevelt with the New Deal. They were sort of liberally inclined New York Jewish gentlemen. Ladies didn't get into this then. And being liberal New York Jewish families, they didn't have any problem with serving everybody, but they weren't necessarily ready to go to jail that night. So to understand that. But they didn't have us arrested, they just let us sit. Because then the Nazis and all showed up. But we had sort of a break for a week so that the store managers could talk and the county officials could talk with them. Turns out, during that week, the county prosecuting attorney decided he wasn't going to enforce the law. It was a state law. He wasn't going to arrest anybody unless the store were closed and the manager requested people that would not leave, that they be arrested. So the managers could serve us without any fear of arrest. And they did. Much to our surprise when we resumed sit-ins over in the area now known as Shirlington. Well, once Arlington started serving folks, then the prosecuting attorney in Fairfax County who had said he would arrest, he said, well, if Arlington's not arresting, we won't arrest either. And then Alexandria joined the chorus and said, no arrest. So that's how the lunch counters got desegregated in Northern Virginia. And back then we had department stores, Landsberg, Hex, Woody's, what have you, ancient history. But then they, in their little lunch rooms and all, they started serving. So it went pretty fast. And then it came to the movie theaters. That was another little nut track, but we sort of nagged the nonviolent action group. It became half movement will travel. We went as far as joining forces with the group, the Civic Interest Group, SIG, sort of like SICM, up in Baltimore, and we even went down to Rock Hill, South Carolina, when they started saying jail, no bail after a lunch county sit-in. And they put out a call for other students across the South to come join them. So the group that was staying in the jail was joined by people like Diane Nash from Nashville, Ruby Doris Smith from Atlanta. Somebody came up from New Orleans and joined them in the jail. A few others. Now the DC group, we didn't go to jail, maybe one person, but we'd go down on the weekends and picket. I remember being on a picket line in front of the variety store, I think it was Kresge's then, and I think I was taken into protective custody. I was put in a police car and taken off because local folks were hassling the picket line. Some white folks who wanted things to stay segregated took offense at it. I think I was taken into protective custody, but the wire service guys, the reporters, saw me being put in the police car and it went out that I'd been arrested. I don't think I was ever booked, but some of the history books have me being arrested in Rock Hill. I don't think so. But when the Freedom Rides could not continue after the bus was bombed in Alabama and supposed to be beaten up in Birmingham at the bus station, the call went out to more Freedom Riders to come. And it was Diane Nash who had been in the jail. Her group in Nashville came to keep the Freedom Rides going. People from our Howard group, our buddy Hank Thomas was on that burning bus. We, in waves, came down to join the Freedom Ride. Dion, who you saw, was in the first wave to leave from Washington to go down and keep the Freedom Rides going. Reggie, who you saw at the beginning, he was with the Richmond crowd. Charles Chimard, who was one of his classmates in Richmond. Charles had been in the jail in. He recruited Reggie to keep the Freedom Rides going. The Atlanta crowd came and kept things going. The New Orleans crowd. So it was the students who had been sitting in, joined the jail in. It was their groups who kept the Freedom Rides going. Are there any questions so far? I can't see, so, these lights blind you, but
reconcile your feelings towards others?
my mother never changed her attitude. She was a product of her environment, the rural South, the segregation of the South. The church, the law, and society all supported that. That was what she was raised to believe, and she continued to believe until her dying day. But having 5 grandsons living nearby sort of mellowed the interaction a lot, and she was a wonderful grandmother. She took all 5 boys at once to McDonald's for dinner every Wednesday night for several years. I think it, doesn't get much better than that, taking being a grandma. My father was from Southwest Ireland. He had no problem with our goals. But as a good government bureaucrat, you all know about good government bureaucrats, you obey the law. You change the law at the top, so it affects the whole country, right? It's not this guerrilla nonviolent warfare, one lunch counter here, one lunch counter there. No, change it at the top, it covers everybody. Of course, the students felt, and you remember Brown versus Board of Education? How long ago was that? How many schools have been desegregated? It's one thing to change the law at the top. It's another to enforce it. So we were doing it our way. But I think my father mainly was afraid that his darling daughter was going to get killed. Just think possibilities. Okay, let's see this next little section. We're going to go on the Freedom Ride. You all ready? If you missed me from the back of the bus, you can't find me nowhere. You don't want me to sing. Come on up to the front of the bus. I'll be riding up there.
Before a seemingly peaceful plan was hatched to confront interstate travel, it would be called the Freedom Rides.
This was an idea that caught the imagination of the country. However, the civil rights community thought it was a bit of a lark. They thought, oh, right, we're just going to ride on buses through the South, for a couple of months. It was almost seen as like a vacation. And some of the people who actually participated initially were viewed as, people who were just, slackers. They didn't want to do the hard work of going and demonstrating in front of, hardcore places, so they were just going to take a bus.
I think we knew from the start it could be dangerous. On the other hand, maybe to break the tension, maybe half thinking it, we were teasing Hank and saying that, here you're going off on this all expense paid vacation. Good way to end the semester, buddy.
how I spent my summer in 1961. Let me tell you the ways.
They put together a small group of 13 riders, I think it was 13, who left Washington on 2 separate buses, making their way through the Upper South. In the Upper South, they were attacked a few times. A couple of people were beaten up, arrested, most notably in Rock Hill, South Carolina. But really all hell broke loose when they got to Alabama.
And all of a sudden, it made national news, and everybody realized this was not just a walk in the park. This was the next stage of the revolution.
I had already had a taste. I'd seen the violence. I just barely escaped the Klan. So I had no illusions whatsoever about what was going to happen next. I didn't know anything about Anniston, Alabama, and then we were told that we are literally going into the belly of the beast. Anniston was a hotbed of Klan activity. And as a matter of fact, Jim Farm, who was a pretty good stump speaker, spoke that night and told a joke about Anniston in terms of foretelling what we were going to be in for. He said there was this bus driver driving a Greyhound bus, and as he got maybe 3 or 4 miles from Anniston, he heard this knock-knock thumping on the side of the bus, so he pulled over to see what it was, and as he opened the door, the Greyhound had gotten down off the side of the bus and wanted to come inside. So he asked, he said, why do you want to do that? He said, we getting ready to go into Anniston. And there were variations of that joke. He said, one preacher said, Lord, we're getting ready to go down to Alabama and we want you to be with us. And he was silent. And he said, Lord, did you hear me? I want you to be with us. So he heard that voice, I'll go with you as far as Anniston. So all kinds of joke about how dangerous it was going to be. Surely enough, when we got maybe a few miles outside of Anniston, we all had been singing on the bus, and as we did that from time to time. A bus coming from Anniston stopped on the opposite side of the highway, and the 2 bus drivers got out and spoke. And the driver of our bus got back on and kind of looked at us and just kind of smiled. As we got into Anniston, the streets were deserted. No one. And it was telling us, this is not good.
A mob firebombed the bus as churchgoers brought their children to watch the Freedom Riders burn alive on Mother's Day. Riders were able to escape, only to be beaten with baseball bats until the local authorities finally stepped in. Freedom Riders were attacked 2 more times in Birmingham and Montgomery, where it appeared things would come to an end. But a call back to my mother in D.C. to send more riders, and a team led by Diane Nash in Nashville, re-energized everyone. However, my mother and the Freedom Riders were now entering Mississippi, a place many would call the heart of darkness.
Joan went on an unusual freedom ride. She and a group from Washington, which included the activists and later SNCC chairman Stokely Carmichael, flew from Washington to New Orleans, which is where the freedom rides were supposed to end. And from New Orleans, they took a train to Jackson and therefore integrated yet another facility, not the bus depot, but the train depot.
You stepped off the bus or out of the train, and you went into the waiting room and together, and whether it was the black one or the white one, and told to move on and move out. Our Captain Ray, did y'all hear me? You gonna do it? You're under arrest. And out to the paddy wagon, and from there to the city jail, and then you had your trial, so-called, which was also down to absolute routine, and over to the county jail.
I got started on my project, of Reach of Peace, because of the mugshots. It's a very remarkable collection of documents of this really in the heat of the battle, if you will, of the Freedom Rides. And all of them, you know, as a set, are tremendous. Some of them really leap out at you, and Joan's is one of those. Joan was somebody I interviewed and photographed very late in my process of going around the country and seeing people. But I was very excited to get to her and meet this very striking young woman who I came to find out had a very extensive career in the movement both before and after the rise. The way I've come to think about it is, they knew they were bearing witness to what was going on in Mississippi and in the South. And part of that was being present, while their mugshot was being made. And I think there's a real quality to, her picture, her portrait, if you will, that really kind of leaps off the page. The great thing that the mugshots afford us is not to see Joan today as someone who did so much and was engaged in so many different facets of the movement, but to see her then and to really think about her as a very young woman who was in the front lines and putting her life at risk. I think that mugshot really kicks all that up in people and gives them the chance that I see people respond to really think about what would I do in that situation? Would I have the courage of my convictions?
In jail, Joan was segregated from the rest of initially from the rest of the black girls. She was put in a cell with some of the white women who had begun to participate in the Freedom Rise.
I had more in common culturally and historically in many ways with the black girls who were in the cell next to us, who came out of the Southern student movement, than I did with the whites in my cell, who were basically all from the North and had most been involved in, oh, how awful the Southerners are, and sympathy pickets in the North at, say, Woolworth or something. They had been involved in Northern political labor and political issues and looked down on the South.
She felt that she had more of a dialogue and a commonality with the black girls from the Southern region than these kind of godless Northerners who, with their strange accents and their strange practices. But she was put in a cell, a very small cell with a bunch of girls. It was not a very pleasant environment. She wrote a diary at that time, and it is a diary that continues to exist.
There was a lot of concern of shakedowns, which are always rumored to be going to happen. So I had on this skirt that had a big, roughly deep hem. We opened that up a little bit, and I would take the diary, this is it, and just sort of crinkle it up and get it really soft, and you could open it up and fold it neatly, and then slip it in my hem. And we figured that way it probably would not get discovered, and even in a good pat down.
My mother would spend 2 more weeks in Hinds County Jail as more and more freedom riders flooded the state from all over the country. But Mississippi had a plan to break the freedom rides and end the civil rights movement once and for all. And so at 19 years old, my mother and her friends were sent to the most dreaded prison in America, Parchment.
Probably one of the most violent and worst places a human being could be.
It was a very brutal place. People kind of went there and disappeared. Some of them were the ones that I saw that got out of there and came back were just broken people. So my thinking when they put the freedom riders was, oh my God, what are these people in for?
Parchment was absolutely notorious. We wanted to believe we were coming out of this alive and in one piece, but it was the place of legends for brutality. And the men apparently had it a lot rougher than the women did, but at the time, you had no idea what was happening to anybody else.
I got mine whooped a couple of times. Wouldn't say you didn't know how to say yassa. and those prison guards were at the lowest rung in white society. They didn't make any money, they just barely made enough to get by. But when they were inside Parchman Prison, they were kings. Okay? So you could pay him $45 a week, and all of the blacks he could whoop up on. Somehow or another he was satisfied.
A lot of the writers told me that the most scared they were in Mississippi, including getting arrested and the whole thing, was the drive from Jackson to Parchman. And that's when they knew they were alone.
Joan was not sure where they were taking her. They were not told where they were going. They were being put into paddy wagons and just taken off. And they were taken off into rural parts of Mississippi.
And this was before interstates, and none of us really had a good, strong fix on quite where Parchman was, except it was in the Delta, and that was bad. And the worst place in the country, Emmett Till had been murdered not too far from there. We had turned off the main highway or route to Parchman, obviously, and going back to this house sort of back off the road. And the guy has his, the driver buddies are out there, and he's sort of showing us off to them, and okay, what are they going to do? And in hindsight, they were probably trying to intimidate us, make us think they were going to do more than they were, and the guy probably needed a pit stop. But we didn't know what was going to happen. We could have been killed. That was crossed our mind that we might well be killed.
So they were taken to Parchman, and Joan tells the story of her first introduction to Parchman, which was not the nice Hinds County jail where she was allowed to have her own clothes.
This is just women, pretty much stripped. And there's a matron there who was given sort of a rough vaginal exam, cleansing her gloved hand between customers, as it were, and a bucket of what smells like Lysol. Still don't go for that smell. And we were issued the coarse denim black and white striped skirts and I think t-shirts.
They cleared out death row in the Parchman Penitentiary so that they could make room for these hundreds of students who were coming in.
I didn't realize that we were on death row until after I had left. When we went back to Parchman, and the warden was able to take me, a young warden at that time who was not even born at the time of the Freedom Ride, took me to the cell where I was held. And that cell, and I walked it off, was 50 feet from the death chamber. And I'm looking there at that gas chamber. And then I turned around and walked back to my cell, and then I had to walk back again to that gas chamber. That's where I was. That's where we were. As far as the state of Mississippi was concerned, we had committed capital crimes.
I definitely wanted to go back to Parchman. I'm not totally sure why, but it had been an important 2 months of my life. Shared so much there with so many. And whatever ghosts were lingering in the back of my persona, I thought this would set them free. I wasn't really at all sure how I would feel when I got there. And I think a lot of us were that way. We wanted to go, but can we handle it? But the reception we got there, from the head of the prison on down, it was good. to see the cell was as small as I remembered it, that not comparable to the Nelson Mandela's experience, but a cell that was smaller than the one he was in for years, we had up to 4 people in. And that did put it, that part of it in perspective. But then some of us who'd been sort of nervous, we were in no hurry to leave. When we were there, we were sort of, even though we were on the same cell block, we were isolated from each other. You just heard voices. You never really had a chance to face-and-face encounter. When you went for showers or something, you were hurried right down that cell block. And to be there reminiscing. Oh, you were down there. Remember when this happened? They did feed us fried chicken on the 4th of July. And just laughing and feeling sort of like a reunion in a unique sort of way. That was good.
Yeah, it just seems funny walking out the door, and some of us, particularly a couple of us, seem sort of reluctant to be leaving. We want to take in more of it. It was the most dreaded prison in America, and terrifying as many of us were to come here. Now we can't get enough of it on our one trip back.
It was good to come away with that. We had to be sort of, the buses have got to leave, Come on, folks. Then we'd find something else to compare notes on. So glad we did it.
The guy, Reggie, who was singing, he's from Washington, D.C. He's still a minister there. And when he was in junior high, he had a little group where he was the lead singer. Who can tell me who his backup singer was? Marvin Gaye. Now, the importance of history, I'm glad we had this history club, because the past is prologue. If you don't know where you've come from, you don't know where you're going. Why was it big that they gave us fried chicken and lemonade on the 4th of July? The 4th of July. Mississippi did not celebrate the 4th of July as we think of it until after World War II. Why? Well, for one thing, fireworks never got there because the Yankees had torn up all the railroad tracks. Beyond that, Vicksburg, Mississippi, in the Civil War, fell to the Union forces on the 4th of July. The Union forces won in Gettysburg on the 4th of July. Doesn't put you, if you're in Mississippi, back in the day, in the mood to celebrate. And here we are, another wave of, as they see it, Yankee invaders in the Freedom Rides. But they're going to feed us fried chicken, special treat, and lemonade on the 4th of July. That was big. Maybe they're thinking it's going to be in the northern press, but the northern press wouldn't understand the significance of it. But I think it's really significant that they gave us a special meal for the 4th of July, given history, where we come from. Now, the third thing I want to say about the Freedom Rides. The Supreme Court had already ruled in the previous December in a case Boynton versus the state of Virginia. You know the name Boynton? Amelia Boynton? Yeah, walked across the Edmund Pettus Bridge holding Barack Obama's hand. The age of about 100. Okay, over 100. Recently died. It was her son who brought suit. He was a law student in Howard. He brought suit after he was arrested at the bus terminal in Richmond, Virginia. And so that got the Supreme Court ruling that facilities associated with interstate travel had to be open to everybody equally. Back in the 40s, there had already been a ruling, again coming from Virginia, Morgan versus the state of Virginia, that the means of conveyance, the bus, the train, what have you, and interstate travel had to be open to everybody equally. That was basically honored in breach. Now we've got a ruling that says the facilities, the bus terminals, the ticket agent, the eateries, the bathrooms, and all must be open to everybody equally. The Freedom Ride was seeing if there was compliance with that rule. In the Upper South, there was, by the time you got down to, sometimes places just opened up for the bus with the Freedom Ride on it to get through, and then closed down again. These were not chartered buses. These were regular buses with non-Freedom Rider passengers. So the facilities were open, and the Freedom Riders came through and then closed down again, back to segregation. Well, the Kennedys didn't like all these riots and things that went on in Alabama, but they struck a deal with the power structure in Mississippi that there would be no violence, but we could be arrested on a non-segregation local charge, which became breach of peace. We upset other people's state of mind to the point that they wanted to take us out. So we got arrested. There's great logic there. All these riots look bad for international relations. I mean, it was in the press all over the world. So the idea became jail, no bail, just like they had in Rock Hill, South Carolina, just like Gandhi has had back in India. Do not postpone until the last minute, if at all. Fill the jails, make it so inconvenient and expensive that the state will decide to obey the law, and maybe the Kennedys will even enforce the Supreme Court ruling. Well, in September, after 400 and some arrests, the Kennedys told the ICC, the Interstate Commerce Commission, to make up some rules that would bring about enforcement of the Supreme Court decision. They came up with it, and it went in force in November. So it did work. Any questions on the Freedom Ride part? Okay, let's see some more, and we'll, I don't know how this is going to run on the clock, but hopefully we'll get through the Jackson, Mississippi.
Where she had been accepted as the first white student to enroll in the school's storied history, and where she would later become a member of Delta Sigma Theta.
I'm sitting here looking around the campus. Feels right at home. The chaplain, our dormitories at either end are still standing. I know where I am. The housing that was really close to County Line Road, on that side of the housing, people had metal plates to deflect bullets that might come in. Every now and again, particularly when things like Meredith was going into Old West or Kennedy was assassinated, anything that got feelings of running high, folks would drive down that road and fire into the houses. Not a lot, but at night the Klan was subject to coming on campus down past the president's house. It was a lot more wooded then than it is now. And some of the guys would be down there waiting for intruders, but with their didn't have their hunting rifles down there, I understand. But occasionally there'd be a crossbow down there, but they'd try to chase them off. This is so scenic. Yeah, not high enough to be inconvenient, but good and sturdy and high enough that someone's feet wouldn't touch the ground. I've never seen it hanging, but well, life has its hazards. Standing on the path that I walked down with Dr. King after he spoke here to take him over to the science building where he was speaking to a crowd. I can't really tell you exactly what Dr. King said, but as always, it was inspirational and helped to give us the strength to press on until victory was won. In many ways, King was our hero, like he was for most of the civil rights movement, the leader, the spokesperson, the inspiring voice. But at other times, these students were totally frustrated with him that he was too busy preaching and not leading enough action. It was a delicate balance.
Joan was considered the segregationist's worst nightmare. The whole concept that somehow, something had happened between this white woman and these black men on campus was a big concern of the authorities in Mississippi. And in fact, there was an attempt to shut down Tougaloo as a result of this reverse integration that was going on. And fortunately for Tougaloo, their charter predated the Jim Crow laws from the late 1800s, and so they were able to kind of skirt by that. But there were certainly many people in Mississippi that were uncomfortable and unhappy with Joan's presence on Tougaloo.
She wasn't the outside agitator. She was a white Southerner. She was a white Southern woman, and so for that purpose, she was even more dangerous to the white supremacist power structure because she was one of their own. She was one of their own who grew up to see that the system was wrong, and she rejected it, and she actively opposed it. And not only that, in addition, it probably shouldn't be underestimated the fact that she was a woman. And of course, white supremacy for at least 100 years had used white women as an excuse for the violence that they enacted upon black men. So here's this white woman who is supposed to be protected by white supremacy, who is supposed to be the one that Jim Crow keeps these black beast rapists and these people, Jim Crow is meant to protect her. Here's this white Southern woman who's supposed to be protected by the system saying, I don't need this protection and I don't believe in the system. And so that made her incredibly dangerous, a huge threat to that power structure.
This is one of the many letters I got after I enrolled at Tougaloo, dated November 14, 1961. My dear Joan Trumpauer, you dear, pitiful child, can't you and the rest of the young generation see what the communists are doing? This isn't the doings of the true-blooded American. It is the Jews and communists behind all of this Negro business. It's true that God made us all humans, black and white, but He didn't intend us to mix. Now here's a card, don't know who it's from. Looks like that was a postcard. Race mixing is a dumb, stupid, unnatural action. Even the animals, birds, and fish know better than to mix. Race mixing is an outrageous action and will result in mongrelization, degradation, and destruction of white Christian America and civilization. Race mixing is a subversive device of the communist plot to destroy white America and Christianity. If you preach, teach, or advocate race mixing, you are promoting the communist line and the religion of the devil. Well, this fan mail was sort of expected. We'd heard it all before. Sometimes it was sad and sometimes it was amusing. This person from Troy, New York. Integration equals communist. Love Governor Barnett. And another one, handwritten, Dear Miss Trumpauer, why do you throw away your silly life on Black Skull? It seems to me you should go to your own people and help them maintain what God has purposely made manifest, segregation. Well, they can spell, but their handwriting could use a few lessons. From Los Angeles. Dear Ms. Trumpauer, I have read the article Reverse Integration in Mississippi several times, and each time I read the article, I'm forced to believe there is a living Christ, or rather a living concept of Christianity. This symbol of the living Christ is you. I do not believe there is to be found anywhere a more dedicated individual than you have shown in the last few years of your activity. Your participation in CORE, and now a student at Tougaloo College, are all traits of your belief in Christian principles.
So how was that when you received it?
Wow, that sort of makes it all worth it. people understand what I'm doing and appreciate it. A little over the top in the praise, comparing me as a living Christ, but at least seeing the connection between Christianity and the way I'm trying to live. That's good. Finally.
By the end of her first year at Tuvalu, Joan was accepted on campus. She was beginning to become part of the fabric of the campus life. She leaves and goes back home. Her parents had attempted to reconcile with her, and frankly were dangling a European vacation in front of her as a way of getting her away from the South. And hopefully, once they got her out of the South, hopefully they would, keep her out of the South. So she accepted this little junket off to Europe for that summer, and apparently had a grand time. But when it was time to go back to school, she went right back to Tuvalu in the fall of 1962. And interestingly, right at that point, there was a new movement developing. John Salter, one of the professors on campus, had begun working with Medgar Evers, the head of the NAACP, to develop a student movement that would eventually rock the foundations of the city of Jackson and the state of Mississippi.
This new movement would explode on May 28, 1963, when John Salter and Medgar Evers took the Jackson boycott to the next level. In all, 14 people would participate in what would become one of the most famous and violent sit-ins of the civil rights movement.
I've heard at various times from a reporter, a cameraman, and the son of one of the reporters that this was the most terrifying, frightening event they covered in the civil rights movement. Now, I guess they weren't in Birmingham or Montgomery with the Freedom Riders, but they got around. And this to them is the worst.
Everyone believed that the students would be immediately arrested and carted off to jail. And so no one thought that that was going to cause much of a ruckus. They really had their hopes pinned on the integrated group of demonstrators outside the store, down the street. When the three individuals, Perlina Lewis, Memphis Norman, and Ann Moody, sat down at the white counter, nothing happened.
The police would not come into the store and arrest the sit-in students because of the Supreme Court decision a week or so before saying they could not come in of their own initiative. They had to be invited by the store manager. This was a case that grew out of the Durham, North Carolina sit-ins, and my name was one of the ones on the decision.
Now, Joan, interestingly, was not supposed to be part of this demonstration. She was what was called a spotter, and she was supposed to spot the demonstration, the protest going on down the street.
But the picket line was arrested more or less immediately, instead of lasting a while. So Lois and I phoned in a report on that, and then they would, Medgar's office would know to get the lawyers and bonds money together. And then it was sort of like, okay, what do we do now? This was a block or so up the street. And we said, well, let's go check in what's happening at Woolworth.
They had no idea that this environment had turned volatile until they walked in the store. And it was right at that moment that a thug, a former police officer, had come in, racist, virulent segregationist, came in and pulled Memphis Norman, the one black male, off of his stool, knocked him onto the floor, and began kicking him mercilessly. Memphis, curled up into a ball and was trying to protect himself in the way that he'd been taught. And luckily, this thug, Benny Oliver was his name, had on just tennis shoes. If he had on any other type of shoe, Memphis would have been severely hurt. In this case, there was still blood running out of his nose, running out of his ear.
Then an undercover policeman came up and arrested both of the guys, the attacker and Memphis, probably breach of peace.
When we had seen Memphis kicked in the head, he had blood coming out his nose and ears, which is not a scratch. Anything could have happened to anybody.
Meanwhile, I was back at the NAACP offices in the Masonic Temple when a quick, hurried call came that a mob was gathering in the Woolworth store, that Memphis Norman had been pulled off his stool and savagely kicked and arrested.
Medgar and John, others in the office, had to make the decision, do we call it off and try to rescue the last two people who were there? And then if we didn't call it off, how could we leave just two people at that counter? Would we have volunteers to go in?
So I set out to head for the Woolworth store. Medgar wanted to come, and I persuaded him not to. Because I said, you're a marked man. And the way this thing is developing, you could get killed.
Joan was then stuck in the situation wondering what's going to happen next. Ann Moody had been pulled off of her stool and thrown against some of the counters. Pearlina Lewis was also pulled from the stool and was down on her knees right by the counter when the police officer came on the scene. Both of them rushed back to the counter, and so that the demonstration would continue. Joan sees all this and realizes, first of all, she is beginning to communicate with the demonstrators. She sees a man with a knife walk by Ann Moody, and she calls out, Annie, he's got a knife. And all of a sudden she's identified with the people at the counter. Who's this white girl talking to those black girls, So all of a sudden she realizes that she's in danger.
But then I sat down. That's when I became a problem.
She walked through that mob in the Woolworth store. And they realized, of course, immediately where she stood.
She joins Pearlina and Annie at the counter, the first white to join the demonstration. And at this, the crowd is just incensed. They become like hornets. They start screaming at her, you black bitch, you white nigger, you traitor, communist.
Yelling, screaming, cursing, laughing, a lot of loud laughter, dirty jokes being cracked, racist remarks. Anytime people went to the counter, though, it was like the crowd, the mob, really turned into an animal. Just an angry roar when they realized someone else was not afraid of them.
One of the white guys who was in league with Betty Oliver grabs Joan and pulls her off the stool. Another one grabs Annie Moody and pulls her off and drags them to the back of the store and out the door. Joan, it's interesting, she kept her composure, and once outside the store, what we see is this white, tough guy pulling on a white Southern girl. And the police arrest the guy and let Joan go back in the store. So he is arrested and carted off, and she's let to go back in the store. Annie is standing right there at the entrance. Somewhere she's lost her shoes, but they're both okay, and they both decided they're safer if they get back to Pearlina and back to the counter, so that's what they do. They make their way back through a throng of a couple of hundred people by this point, back to the counter.
I went immediately to the lunch counter to sit with Joan and Annie Moody. A white man, mistaking me identity-wise and mission-wise, yelled out, "Hit him hard, boy, hit him." But then I sat down with them, and the crowd was quiet for just one moment, and then I heard my name mentioned by somebody. And then they moved in on me.
When Salter joined, the crowd turned violent. He was knocked in the back of his head with brass knuckles. There was a student who put his cigarette out on the back of Salter's neck. There were several cigarettes, and you can still see it to this day. If you look on the back of his neck, he has scars in the shape of a cigarette. they threw pepper and water mixture into his eyes.
My guideline was, don't let the sons of bitches see you suffer. Meanwhile, I was chain smoking my Pall Malls if I could.
I talked to the police outside. There were about 40, 50 police outside the store who were letting whites in. And I talked to them about, what's happening. Why don't you come in and stop it? And they would laugh and say, it's your business, you folks started it. But they certainly knew about all the violence inside. You could see it through the windows.
They just got so hostile that this white man was sitting in. Things were just going out of control. And at that point, Joan had said that she believed that they were not going to make it out alive. None of them were going to make it out alive.
I think I was beyond fear. I think I was driven by determination to carry this through. And by the time I sat at the counter a while, it was like an out-of-body experience that the real me had left the body, and it was just a shell there. And the real me was sort of up above, like a guardian angel, letting me know what was happening and protecting me to some extent. But the real essence of me, the important part, was already out of there.
So there we were, and this went on for probably, it started at 11, got violent around 11:30. We got there before 12, something like that. It ended around 2:30. By that time, there were really several hundred people in the Woolworth store. And a great number of them outside. I learned later that a huge crowd outside extended down the sidewalk way around the street corner.
The spotters did observe the FBI doing its normal task when people were threatened with death. Very carefully observing.
I understand the FBI was there somewhere, and undercover police and the State Sovereignty Commission, Citizens Council, everybody was there in their role, recording it, egging it on.
So I'd say 90% of the thugs in the store were young, but they were the results of what would be years of white Citizens Council racial indoctrination. Some of it conveyed even by lesson plans, which cooperative teachers introduced into curriculums.
The kids were a product of their environment, but they were also the tools of power structure it was using to accomplish its ends.
What eventually...
The college president got word of what was happening, came down, talked to the store manager who was refusing to close the store, called the National Woolworth office, and they advised the manager to close things. The college president arranged with the police that we would be given safe passage to the sidewalk while cars were brought up, to pick us up and take us back down to the mayor's office. Once we got there, the ladies cleaned us up, hairdresser took us to a hairdressing place across the street, got us all washed up, looking beautiful again. The people are on the front lines, but just as important are the people who have your back, who do the cooking, who drive you, who call the press, who call the bondsmen, who wash your hair. The demonstrators could not succeed without the people that have their back. For those of you who don't feel you can, take it to the streets, there's room for you too. Now, one thing I want to say about that picture that everyone's seen, it's used everywhere. We're through with it, so you can turn it all off. We'll run out of time. The guy who took that picture, Fred Blackwell, 22 years old, essentially the same age as the demonstrator. He had gone to the same high school as the guys in the crowd. He knew a lot of them because he knew their older buddies with their older brothers and sisters. The guy with the cigarette lived 3 doors down the street. So of course, when Fred came in as a second-string photographer for the local evening newspaper, his sympathies were with his friends, understandable. But Fred stood on the lunch counter to take his pictures instead of looking down at us. That was a dangerous place to be. The TV cameraman who took those pictures of Memphis being picked had already been knocked to the floor and his camera broke. It had been very easy for Fred's friends to think you're a traitor, grab his leg and pull him off the counter. End up taking pictures. But Fred stood there. By the time the demonstration was over, his sympathies had shifted from his friends to the demonstrators. That is the power of nonviolence, converting people through your actions. And pictures appeared in the evening paper, and a kid at a rival white high school saw them. Found out over 50 years later that the power of the pictures changed his heart from the local segregationists to supporting integration in Jackson, Mississippi. The power of the press. The students take it to the street, the lawyers take it to the press, to the court, but the press takes it to the world. So if you're taking it to the streets, always remember the power of the press. They take your story to the world. Okay, enough from me. Your questions, your comments, before we end it all. And I really can't see too good out there, so just speak up.
Thank you for fighting for my freedom and paving the way. That's remarkable. My question is, you've seen so much. I mean, you are history, walking history yourself. Today, this very age that we live in, do you think we've come very far as a society?
We have Barack Obama and President. Barack Hussein Obama. I never thought I would live to see that moment. But I say we have structures built on a foundation. The structures, the laws, a lot of the customs, those have crumbled. They're gone, particularly the laws. But that foundation they were built on, racism, is still rock solid. And the next job, the hardest job, is to get out your nonviolent pickaxes and dig up that foundation. That's the job for you younger folks out there. Whatever means necessary or means at your disposal. You got tools that we never had. So, go do it. We'll have your back. Our generation will. Yes, sir.
My question is, there seems to be a strong connection between the demonstration and the civil rights movement and what's taking place now with different movements like the Black Lives Matter. And there's also seemed to be a connection between, or if you can speak about the connection between some of the resistance people had at the time for the way you all decided to demonstrate, as well as the resistance some of us have, or some people have with the way Black Lives Matter is demonstrating, interrupting political events and things of that nature. Can you speak to, is there a connection that you see between the resistance, and what would you say to people who question the tactics of modern day people who are trying to be activists and demonstrate?
Wow, that's just a little beyond my scope. I think violence begets violence. So I don't see the point in it. So tonight, Charlie Cobb, who's part of SNCC, will be speaking at the Potter's House in D.C. on his book, This Nonviolent Stuff, and that was not the word originally, will get you killed. People didn't have guns. were willing to use them on the movement side if they felt it was absolutely necessary to defend their families. It takes everybody working together. It takes this philosophy of how to change it and that philosophy. And the points where they can come in common, that's good. Otherwise, we're working independently, but we do get change. I don't have the answers. It doesn't answer your question. That's what I can say.
You. I applaud your courage and your boldness. How do you address skeptics? Like initially I was skeptical because I'm like, okay, here's a white soror, and is she authentic or is she an infiltrator? Because you know we did have infiltrators during the civil rights era.
Oh, sure. From the government on down.
So exactly, and still today. So when I came here, I'm like, I don't know, but I saw your authenticity on the screen. So I'm very thankful for that. However, how do you convey or communicate to Black people who are skeptical about white people coming into Black organizations?
Well, judge us by the content of our character. When I wrote at Trumpauer, yes, there were people skeptical about me. They were used to white people on campus with the freedom rides and half the faculty and that type of thing, but it was like, is she for real? Or is she just coming down for a semester like her semester abroad thing? Even if she's trying to really learn, she won't be here next year. It's staying power. By the time I came back in second semester, and particularly the second year, I was there. One girl, she's not a Delta, she's affiliated with another group. She said, yeah, I wondered about you, but I saw you every night in the library studying just as hard as we were. So I decided you were for real. There's a lady in Washington State, and I would say she needs help. I believe you know from whom I speak, and the ways we speak. But people evolve. A person may come in just to sort of check it out for whatever reason. But they may evolve to be genuine, if you would think of it. Pound living proof that drinking coffee doesn't affect your complexion, contrary to popular rumors. But I'm white. I'll always be white. No problem with that. I'm a Southerner. People say, oh, Northern Virginia isn't the South. Hey, Robert E. Lee is my homeboy. And remember that his daughter was arrested in Alexandria for refusing to move to the front of the bus as it filled up. She stayed in her seat. Black folks could just sit in front of her, no problem. So, people in history evolve. And the infiltrators, that's a given. They're there, live with it.
Hello, Ms. Ora. My name is Phyllis Randall. I was wondering, I'm politically involved, and I know a lot of the freedom rides were about getting people registered to vote. What do you think about the fact that, especially for off-year or off-year elections, voter turnout, especially amongst people of color, tends to be very low? Do you have any thoughts or ideas about the fact that especially young people don't vote, people of color don't vote? And do you have any ideas to what we can do to make people, or encourage people to be more politically active and to get out and vote every election?
I think all communities have a low vote. I think not just knocking on doors and phoning people, that aggravates them, but taking them say, if you need help, you need a babysitter, or you go vote, we'll do that for you. You need a ride to the poll because it's pouring rain, we'll give you that. I think the history of the people who died and the struggle it took to get the vote should be emphasized. When Obama was elected, I could not join in the cheering. I knew I had to go and visit Medgar's grave, give him the report, and leave off my Obama pen. Then I could cheer, but I had to remember the price that was paid to get us there.
How did it feel when people were throwing stuff at you in the sit-ins?
Well, they were wasting good food, weren't they? There's a saying that you can kill the body, but not the soul. And we have to remind ourselves of that. People say, what were we talking about? We were joking amongst ourselves. Oh, Professor Salter, that exam was that was not a fair question you asked us. We made jokes. Other times, we were holding hands and praying. But I feel when it got really violent, it's better to die for a cause than to cross on the street when somebody's driving crazy. So you got to pick how you go if you have a choice. Possibly because I run my mouth too much. But we have another movie star here. Come on, stand up, sir. Yeah, you. Caden. Caden's in the movie too. He was at the school for my son, and my father was there. So if you get the whole version, you'll get to see him as a second grader. Because he grew up a bit, you may not recognize him. Any more questions before we turn it over to the folks who are the last part of the program? You have a good light? Let's see. Nope. Okay. Oh, here comes the floor. Yes, ma'am.
I was sitting back there hesitating for a little while. There's so many different questions I could ask. And so I don't know so much it's a question at first, but it's an observation and a sadness, truly, that I don't see more Caucasian people in the audience. Every time I come to the MLK events or different events talking about diversity and compassion and tolerance. And so I thought a lot about this. On Martin Luther King Day, when I told my kids we're going to go to the parade or we're going to do something of service and kind of hemmed and hawed, I looked at them and I said, this wouldn't even be a question for you if your skin was black. You take so for granted that you just got white skin and all of the things that come with that. And even today, we need to have more conversations with our kids and our communities about tolerance. I see so much, we all see so much intolerance in this campaign. It's beyond all of us. We feel almost helpless, like we have to accept it because we don't know what to do about it ourselves. And so I'm wondering what we can do. What would be your advice to everybody in this audience that we could take personal responsibility to have a conversation with someone who doesn't look like us? Befriend someone. Tell them what it's like to live in your shoes. Share the hardships that you've had so that they can better understand you. My fourth grader had a homework assignment this week, and it was absolutely brilliant. The homework assignment was go interview someone in your family about the risk that they've taken in their life. And the whole purpose of that was to teach the children resilience and risk-taking. Wouldn't it be so great if we had that same kind of conversation with each other to share? So, I don't know, that's not 100% a very formed question to you, but I just love to implore this Loudoun County community that we have here, that we need to break the barriers more, and maybe our nonviolent action is that we go and take the hand of someone who looks different from us. We get out of our comfort zone because excellence lives in that place where we get out of our comfort zone. So thank you for living a life of being out of your comfort zone. And getting up here was a little bit out of mine, so thank you.
Sometimes I find things that are as simple as picking up something in the grocery store that you don't know what it is or how to use it, or pretend you know, and ask another customer who looks like they may be from the ethnic group that eats that stuff. At my local supermarket, I have had a whole group in the checkout line get involved in a discussion of whatever I was holding, and oh, that one's better, and that's the one we ate at home. It's just looking for odd moments to see, to start a conversation. They may not lead to any further, encounter with that person, but right at that moment, it's showing something. And my last thing, when I was at the Freedom Summer Reunion in Jackson, well, actually, it was Boogaloo, Mississippi, there was a poster on the wall that said, "Y'all means all." It's just that simple. I like that poster. Y'all means all. And I never saw anybody selling them or anything. So the last day of the conference, I liberated that poster. It's now framed in my house. But this is a parting thought, even for you Yankees. Y'all means all. It's just that simple. Thank you.
Shadow